Why my mom hates Halloween. My mom is a pretty chill person. She is a little religious nowadays, but a lot of that has to do with her past, which, mind you, is pretty crazy. She grew up in the 70s and lived a fairly normal life. Over the years, as I've gotten older, I've begun to know her more like a friend and less like a mom. Recently, she confided in me why she hates Halloween. Growing up, my mom let me and my brother celebrate the holiday, but she never got into the spirit of Halloween. No decorations, no parties. She just let us go trick-or-treating with our dad, and that was it. She never passed out candy. All of this had to do with something tragic from her past, something that happened on one Halloween night. You've probably heard about the candy scares from back in the day. The rumor was that someone put razor blades in candy and a couple kids got jacked up. Since then, they've debunked the stories, stating rather conclusively that they were urban legends with no factual truth. According to my mom, though, some of these stories were real. And because of that, she can't celebrate Halloween. My mom grew up in a suburb outside of Milwaukee. Like every other little kid in the world, she was excited to celebrate Halloween. She was 9 years old when it happened. Everything was normal, she said, like every other Halloween. Her father would take her and her sister and brother trick-or-treating right at 7. They would walk around collecting candy for an hour or so and then head back home. They got to eat a few pieces of candy and then watch a show together before heading to bed. On that particular Halloween, my mom said she was dressed as Minnie Mouse. Her younger brother was Mickey, and her older sister was Daisy Duck. They were a trifecta of Disney characters. They walked around their neighborhood, just like in previous years, and started filling their buckets with candy from their neighbors. Then they got to one house on the end of their street, a house they normally avoided. My mom didn't really specify why they avoided it. They just did. They approached the house apprehensively, taking a few small steps at a time, trying to guard how close they got. The man that opened the door, according to my mom, was massive. He was bald and his stare was empty. He reached into their bags and placed candy, but they couldn't tell what he'd put inside, if anything. There was a group of kids walking with them who started eating candy right away. My mom looked over and saw a kid smile, and then his face turned stone cold. Blood poured out of his mouth. He started coughing and convulsing on the sidewalk. My mom, as a little kid, reached down to help him, but he just spit blood on her. As she was telling me about it, she said he kept spitting more blood and more blood until her mini costume was covered in it. The kid tried to talk, but it was to no avail. He opened his mouth and his tongue fell out. Right there on the sidewalk, his tongue fell out of his mouth. Still to this day, Mom turns white as she tells the story, the blood leaving her face. There was so much blood, she said, and the way his tongue fell out of his mouth, it was like he was just spitting out broccoli he didn't want to eat. My mom said everyone around them started screaming. They were looking for an adult, someone to intervene in the situation, but it was just a few of them standing there. Then another kid started coughing a little further down the street. It was the same thing as before. Blood filled the front of his shirt until he passed out on the ground. My mom was about to run towards him when another kid right next to her started going through the same thing. Blood leaked out of his mouth and ran down his shirt. The way my mom tells it, he looked at her in the eyes, crying and begging for her to do something. Then his mouth burst open and blood spilled out. He spit out stuff from the inside, not his tongue, but his tonsils. They plopped on the ground and then he passed out. I find this all hard to believe, but according to my mom, What happened next was the most terrifying thing to ever occur. 4 or 5 more kids started going through the same thing. Blood spewed all around her. She looked to my uncle. His smile cracked open and blood came trickling out, filling his Mickey Mouse costume. She screamed and wrapped her arms around him. The blood soaked her shirt as well. He opened his mouth and then his head snapped backwards. The full weight of his body was too much for my mom, so she let him drop to the ground. At that moment, she says, she looked back at the creepy house and the man was standing there on his porch. He was staring out at the carnage. He was smoking a long pipe and laughing maniacally. "The end is coming, children," he said. "The end is coming." Although my mom thought the scene was undetected by police or adults, she was wrong. Shots rang out in the night, and the man on the porch fell to his knees. In seconds, he was surrounded by police, who cuffed him and kicked down the door. My mom stood there on the sidewalk, watching it all happen. They recovered a lot of interesting items from his house. They found a basement with various torture devices. They found hundreds of Polaroid pictures all over his house of kids and teenagers. And they found a bowl full of chopped up razor blades. Turns out, the man in the house was chopping up razor blades and putting them into candy. Some of the pieces were large, others were fairly small. The end result, however, was the same. They cut up the inside of his victims' mouths. My mom said she threw away all the candy she collected that night. Her brother, my uncle, survived the massacre. To this day, he has a bit of a speech impediment when he talks. He says it's just how his tongue works. My mom tells me he has blocked out the memory of that Halloween night, and rightfully so. After all my mom went through on that Halloween night, I'm surprised she lets any of us participate in the holiday. I asked her why she's okay with us going out and experimenting with the candy. As a young kid, I remember my mom meticulously checking the candy before we got to dig in. She'd open most of the pieces just to be safe and find that they were without razor blades or tampering of any kind. I appreciated it. She confided in me. "I don't sleep at all on Halloween. I'm up half the night thinking about that man on his front porch and the kids who spit out their tongues. I don't think I'll ever unsee that." We survived Halloween this year as we normally do. But when my mom told me that story, I couldn't help but think a little differently about the holiday. I understand why she stays inside and doesn't dress up. I understand now why she hates Halloween. We pranked a haunted house on Halloween, and now I'll never go home again. "Last one there's a rotten egg," Kyle bellowed as he sped off on his bike. It was a childish threat, one that really didn't mean much of anything, but it didn't stop me from pedaling my bike faster and faster. My calves burned, and sweat poured down my brow as the bike chain churned around and around. Our blue and silver bicycles tore around the bend in a flash as the sun set over the field of soybeans. We pulled off Elm Street and took a ride on Walnut Grove. I kept a tight grip on my Halloween basket, looping it over the handlebar. The candy threatened to spill over at each curve in the road, but I was ever so careful. I couldn't let my bounty go to waste, and Kyle would certainly win if I stopped to collect it. We were neck and neck when we reached the old farm on Rustwire Road. Kyle grinned at me through his ghostly face paint as he pulled out a roll of toilet paper from his bag. "I don't know. Do you really think we should do it?" I asked reluctantly. Oh, come on. Don't be such a wimp. We will be legends if we toilet paper the haunted farmhouse. He cackled with delight. The plan had been set at school earlier in the week. Kyle was dared by Tommy Thompson, and Kyle never backed down from a dare. Even now, I could see that steely look of determination on his face. His eyes glowed with resolve under the mop of blonde hair. I was hesitant and didn't share the same enthusiasm of vandalizing the most haunted place in the whole county. An entire family had died here, for God's sake. But I rested my bike on its kickstand and followed after him anyway. He was my big brother after all, and I'd been in his shadow my entire life. We circled the farmhouse, sticking to the sides of the shrubbery to stay out of view. It had sat empty since the family had died about 14 years ago, but we had to be sure before we started. Not a sound or silhouette stirred in sight, other than thistles swaying in the breeze throughout the unkept yard. Once it was clear that we were the only people around for miles, Kyle shoved an armful of toilet paper rolls into my arms. You go get those trees, and I'll get these, he chuckled, pointing to a row of pines to my right. I loosened the edges of the rolls and pitched them in a stream over the tree limbs. It felt wrong, but I did as I was told. I could hear my brother whistling a tune from the other side of the yard. He seemed to enjoy the prank entirely too much. I thought about the family as we worked. I didn't know all the details, but I knew there had been suspicions of foul play. Some even claimed that they had been murdered in their sleep, but others had said it was natural causes, a gas leak. Who knew what the truth was? But the eeriest thing was the rumor that they had been buried on the property and that their ghosts still lingered around the farm. Tommy Thompson said his cousin had seen them once, floating between the pines. But Tommy was also full of shit, more often than not. That didn't stop a shiver from going down my spine, though. We finally came to meet in the middle of the yard. The trees were thoroughly covered in flowing tissue paper. By the time we were almost done, it was dark. Stars twinkled above as a few clouds lazily drifted by. If Tommy could only see us now, my brother beamed. Yeah, we sure did it, didn't we? I shuffled my feet anxiously. We sure did, kid. Kyle patted my shoulder after tossing the last roll of toilet paper. We strolled through the yard for a while, admiring our work and talking about anything and everything. I chewed on some Tootsie Rolls from my pocket and fussed at the dirt on my costume as Kyle went on and on about girls, guts, and glory. Then for a while we just fell quiet. Kyle played with an old Zippo he found on the bus, while I tossed some loose stones into a creek that flowed on the edge of the property. I wondered why we hadn't started on our way back home yet, but was enjoying the peace and quiet. The guilt from the prank was even starting to wash away. Where do you think the family is buried? I asked, abruptly ending the silence. Oh, right next to the barn, he replied. How do you know? I furrowed my brow. Come on, I'll show you. He gestured for me to follow him as he crossed the lawn towards the decrepit red barn. I strolled closely behind him, my heart thundering in my chest. I immediately regretted asking the question. I didn't want to see where they were buried, but I also didn't want to disappoint him. The barn creaked in the breeze. The paint peeled in multiple places, and the wood looked consumed with rot. Planks hung haphazardly where bolts had rusted out in the framing. One big storm would be all it would take to bring this thing down. Kyle came to stop next to a patch of earth that had some semblance of being disturbed, perhaps a long time ago. The grass wasn't as thick, and there were some large stones tangled in the weeds. "They're buried right here." He tapped his foot on the ground. "Wow!" I hugged my body with my arms. I didn't know what to say. We stared at the grave for a while before I started getting curious again. "But how did you know?" "Because that's where Dad buried them," Kyle replied, while stepping down to pick up a large stone. "Wait, what?" My mouth went dry. "He told me." He shrugged, turning the stone over in his hands. I don't understand." "You know what else he told me?" "What?" "That I should bury you right next to them." Before I could react, a large stone came careening towards my head. It was too late to stop it. Everything went black. I awoke to whistling, that same joyous whistling. Then something soft and heavy splashed against my torso. I struggled to see. I opened my eyes just in time for a huge heap of dirt to pour into them. I struggled to move but couldn't. My hands were bound. I tried to scream, but my lungs filled with earth. He said I should bury you right next to them. The words echoed in my mind as the darkness overtook me once more. The Girl in the Woods. Leaves crunching under my feet, cool breezes, the aroma of nearby neighbors burning leaves in the distance, just wafting through the crisp fall air. Fall is my absolute favorite time of the year. I think my most favorite part of all is the way the brightly colored leaves in the trees contrast against the gray skies. The autumn months in Pennsylvania are just beautiful. I've grown to really appreciate the beauty of nature and all it has to offer. The woods are old. They have stories to tell. Don't be fooled, though, by all the beauty around you in the woods. Nature can be both cruel and kind, so the woods are tinged with sadness amongst the beauty. This is what brings me to a story about a particular walk in the woods that I took that still chills me to the bone. I'd like to share it with you now. My name is Wilhelmina, Mina for short. I've lived in this part of Pennsylvania my whole life, grown up in and around these woods. I take daily walks in the woods behind my home. I really enjoy being one-on-one with the woods and hearing nothing but the sounds of nature all around me. On this day, on this particular walk, I kept hearing what I thought were little footsteps not far behind me. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just a little critter scurrying by. But every time I continued walking, the footsteps continued as well. When I stopped, they stopped. Each time I stopped and spun around to look, there was nothing there. I decided to turn around and start slowly walking back the way I came, hoping to find the source of the footsteps. I stood still until I heard the sounds again. I went a little off the path and continued listening for the leafy footsteps. The noise stopped when I approached a giant old oak tree. I'm inching up to the massive tree trunk and start circling around, and all of a sudden, all I hear is, "Boo!" I must admit, I about shot myself at that moment. Suddenly, this adorable little girl pops out from behind the tree. She looked to be about 7 or 8 years old. She's all decked out in a vintage-looking dress, Mary Jane shoes, and one of those flimsy masks you could buy at the 5 and dime back in the day. Hers was a bunny mask, strapped to her face by an elastic string in the back. Kind of creepy, really.
Did I scare you?
She giggles. Yes, you gave me quite the fright, little miss. She asked me what I was doing out here alone in the woods. I told her I was just starting out my evening walk. She asked if she could join me. I replied, "Of course you can, but won't your parents worry?" She said,
"Just for a little bit, and I'll come right back home."
After a little hesitation, I agreed to let her tag along. So along we went, back up onto the leafy trail through the woods. As we started walking, I introduced myself. "My name is Mina. What's your name, sweetie?"
"Mina. That's a pretty name. My name is Susie."
"It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Susie. So, I see that you're very excited for Halloween, huh? You're wearing your costume a whole day early. Though I can't blame you. I love Halloween too." Susie paused for a second, staring at me blankly, tilting her head and said,
"I never take it off, silly." "Yes, I just love Halloween, Mina."
We walked and skipped along, just chatting and having a good time, until I realized the sun was setting rather quickly. I suggested we head back before her parents started to worry, and I didn't want to get stuck in the woods at night. Just as we turned to head back, Susie gave me the pouty lip, out from under her bunny mask. I asked her what was wrong. She said,
"Mina, could we walk together again tomorrow? I don't have any friends here. It's lonely. I had so much fun with you today."
I told her of course we could. I reminded her, though, that Halloween and trick-or-treat were tomorrow, so we would have to start our walk early so that she wasn't late to go out trick-or-treating. She looked at me through the eye holes of the bunny mask with those pretty hazel eyes and said the most chilling thing.
"I have plenty of time, Mina. Endless amounts of time here. I won't be late."
I gave her a puzzled look, but soon brushed it off as just the quirky things kids say sometimes. We then continued our walk back until the big giant oak tree came into view again. That's where I met Susie. That's also how I know I'm getting close to home after my walks. Well, this is where we part ways, my new friend. Now hop along home safely. It's not hard to get lost in these woods, so hurry, okay?" Susie replied in a somber tone.
"I know these woods all too well, Mina. No need to worry about me. I'll see you tomorrow."
"Bye, Susie. I'll see you right here, a little earlier tomorrow." I watched as Susie happily skipped away, her tousled brown hair just bouncing around and blowing in the breeze. A faint
"See you tomorrow, Mina,"
could be heard faintly in the distance. The elastic from the mask all tangled in her hair. How painful that must be, I thought. I laughed it off and made my way out of the woods and back home just before dark. The next morning I woke up and remembered it was Halloween. I still get excited like a child when it comes to Halloween. I always carve multiple pumpkins, buy lots and lots of candy to pass out, and decorate my house inside and out weeks before Halloween. After waking up, getting ready, having my morning coffee, I put the final touches on all of the decorations for this evening. Trick or treat and my walk with Susie were still several hours away, so I decided to hop in the car and run to a local store to put together a little Halloween gift for my new friend Susie. I browsed the Halloween aisles for something I thought she would like. I decided to get one of those orange jack-o'-lantern buckets with the handle. I got some things to fill it up, such as a small flashlight, a glow stick necklace, a cute stuffed bat, and a few kinds of candy. I got home with all the stuff and stuffed the jack-o'-lantern bucket with all of the goodies and a Halloween card tucked inside that said, "Happy Halloween, Susie. I hope you get all the best candy this year. Sincerely, your friend Mina." When it was just about time to head out for my walk, I put on my leggings, walking shoes, ghost face socks, my favorite Michael Myers hoodie, and grabbed Susie's gift and headed out the back door, up the back hill, and into my woods. I started out at a steady pace, as not to waste any of Susie's trick-or-treat time later. I made my way up onto the trail, heading deep into the woods. The large oak tree finally came into view. I was out of breath, but kept pushing along. Susie came into view. I still remember how minuscule she looked, standing next to that enormous tree. As I got closer and closer, I could see her excitement building. She was hopping in place, all excited and waving at me. Her joy just made my heart melt.
"Happy Halloween, Susie! I brought you a little something."
I extended my arm out, revealing her gift. I could see her eyes light up through the eye holes of the bunny mask. She all but snatched my hand off, accepting her gift.
"Oh, thank you, Mina."
"You're welcome, Susie. Use your flashlight and glow necklace while you trick-or-treat tonight, okay? I want you to stay safe." Susie giggles and responds,
"Okay, Mina, I will."
"Now let's get our walk underway so that you're not late for trick-or-treating later," I said. So off we went, back up into the beautiful leafy woodsy path. "Hey, Susie, are your parents okay with you going for walks with me? I wouldn't mind meeting them so that they know you're safe with me." Susie responds,
"Oh, Mina, you worry too much. My parents worry too much too, but they don't have to worry anymore."
Again, her response gave me chills and made the hairs stand up on my neck. What did she mean, anymore? What did that mean? But again, I brushed it off and we continued chatting, walking, skipping, and snacking on the candy from her bucket. A half an hour went by, and I realized we were approaching my turnaround point. I've never gone beyond this part of the woods. No particular reason why. It just always felt like I should stop at that point, for some reason, so I just always have. That area of the trail doesn't feel as welcoming and pretty as the previous part of my trail. It feels sad, dreary, scary even sometimes. "Susie, it's time for us to turn around and head back. I'm unfamiliar with what's up ahead, and you have an evening full of trick-or-treating and candy ahead of you. Let's get you back." Susie replies saying,
"Okay, Mina. But hey, are you up for a Halloween adventure in the woods before you go home?"
I looked at her inquisitively and asked her, "Sounds interesting. What did you have in mind for me? I have to walk you back, though, so I don't think I have time today." She responds saying,
"Mina, I've told you. I know these woods all too well. I can get myself back home before dark."
I reluctantly agreed and asked her what adventure she had in mind. She said,
"Well, just up there a little further up the path, you'll see a big, beautiful weeping willow tree. Just off the trail to the right. It's impossible to miss it. Walk straight over to the tree. Now, here's the funnest part, Mina. You have to go through the long, wispy branches of the willow tree."
Susie continues,
"Walk through the branches, past the trunk, and make your way through the other side of the droopy branches to the outside. You will see a very old path in front of you. Be careful, though. It's overgrown and a little bit dangerous. You can't miss it, though. Just keep following the path to the top of the hill, into the clearing. There's a tree there that you can't miss. I think you'll be surprised by what you find, Mina."
I raised my eyebrows in curiosity and said, "Thanks, Susie. You know what? I think I will check it out really quick before it gets dark. Are you absolutely certain you can get home from here on your own?" Susie lifts her little hand, grasps the chin of her bunny mask, slides it up just enough to show me a big grin. She then says,
"Mina, thank you for walking with me, and thank you for being my friend. I loved my gift, too. I will get back home by my own, okay? I need to get home and get ready to go trick-or-treating. I hope you like what you find on your adventure, Mina,"
Susie said with a grin. I gave her a big smile and thanked her for the adventure I was about to go on. I wished her happy Halloween again and told her that I hoped to see her soon for another walk together. I then said to Susie, "Okay, little bunny rabbit, it's time to hop that cottontail home before you're late. I had so much fun with you. Can we walk again tomorrow so that I can hear all about the piles of candy you got?" This was the first time Susie seemed extremely melancholic since I met her. Her sweet grin faded slowly. She slid her mask down back in place and said to me,
"I really would have enjoyed that, Mina. I'm sorry, but I can't. I'll never forget you, Mina."
She hung her little rabbit face and turned to leave. She looked back over her shoulder and said something I will never forget. Susie looked at me over her shoulder and said,
"They couldn't find me. They just couldn't find me. I had to find my way back home by myself."
Before I could respond, she was already skipping away, jack-o'-lantern bucket swinging back and forth. I watched her until she skipped and hopped out of sight. I was left so puzzled. What did she mean by that? I have to admit, I had goosebumps as she skipped and hopped away. I paused for a moment and then turned to face the trail ahead of me. I continued up the path as Susie instructed. I knew the sun was setting fast, so I was jogging at this point. I kept at a steady pace until I saw the beautiful weeping willow that Susie told me to look out for. She was right. You couldn't miss it. I cut off the trail to the right and didn't stop until I reached the willow. I lifted my hands and separated the lush, weepy, low-hanging branches and ducked my head inside. The branches closed shut behind me as I made my way through the large, wise, old weeping willow tree. Clear to the other side and out. I poked my head out to see the exact trail Susie said I would see. I stepped out from under the willow tree and headed over to the old trail. The path was so overgrown, mossy and narrowed. I carefully but swiftly followed the mossy trail and then uphill for quite a while to a clearing at the top of the mossy rocky hill, just like Susie said. I made it to the top of the hill and was mesmerized by the size and beauty of the huge old red maple tree that stood before me. It stood out so much in this empty meadow. The trunk of that magnificent tree was massive. I stood underneath its canopy of blood-red leaves and looked up, marveling at the old branches twisting their way upwards to the sky, producing those beautiful red leaves, just swirling around in the autumn breeze, the sun catching them just right and lighting them up. It was so enchanting to see. I approached the trunk and placed my hand on its bark. I then made my way around the massive base, walking around, sliding my hand along the deep ridges in the old bark. As I just about made a full circle around the trunk of the tree, something caught my eye that I hadn't noticed before. It looked like cement peeking out from years' worth of leaves and earth. It looked unnatural and out of place. My morbid curiosity got the best of me, So I then knelt down and pulled my hoodie sleeves over my hands and started clearing away all of the leaves and dirt so that I could see what was underneath. What I revealed was a headstone. A headstone in the middle of the woods? Intrigued, I used my sleeve to clear all the dirt off the front of the headstone to see what it said. It was so old and weathered. The sun was setting fast, so it was so hard to make out what the headstone said. Suddenly, a gust of chilly fall wind made the branches of the maple tree sway in such a way that the last rays of sun from the day shone upon that headstone, illuminating it just enough to read. What I saw made my eyes widen, my jaw drop, and every hair on my entire body stood erect. The old headstone at the base of that maple tree, in the middle of those woods, read as follows: "Here lies Susie Osborne, our little bunny rabbit, 9/18/1900 to 10/31/1907. My eyes immediately flooded with hot tears. I crumbled to my knees and fell back, head between my knees, just trying to gather what I had just read. There's no way that's my Susie, I thought. No way. I had to collect myself, though, because it was nearly dark out and I needed to get home fast. I took a few deep breaths, told myself to be strong, and I got up and started heading back the way I came. With Susie and so many questions and a lot of fear on my mind, I hurried back down the hill, nearly falling several times, made my way back through the willow tree and back up onto my trail. I was at a full sprint at that point, from the adrenaline rush and fear. I had so many questions. Was I assuming things? There's no way that's the same Susie. I'll see her tomorrow, and this will all just be a creepy coincidence, I told myself. I kept up that sprint until I realized I was close to the familiar old oak tree where I first met Susie. That tree also meant I was almost home. I slowed to a walk as I approached the part of the trail next to Susie's tree. I'm not sure why I stopped, but I felt compelled to. I left the path and walked over to the trunk of the ancient oak tree. I circled around the base of the tree, hoping to see Susie pop out at me safe and sound. I needed to know she was okay. Instead of finding Susie, what I found still chills me to the core today. What I saw laying on the ground at the base of the trunk of the oak tree was the jack-o'-lantern bucket I had given to Susie. It was placed ever so nicely up against the tree, all of the contents still inside, with her bunny mask propped on the front of it. I was so confused and so creeped out that I left it there and got back up in the trail and didn't stop running until I got to my back door. This was without a doubt my worst Halloween ever. I felt real terror. It was not a good night for me that night. I slept restlessly and having nightmares over and over. I woke up in a cold sweat the next morning. I hoped I had dreamt the whole headstone in the woods nightmare. I went through the motions of the day, trying to keep my cool. At dusk, I decided to get brave and set out on my daily walk in the hopes of seeing Susie. I was sincerely hoping that she led me on that adventure to that creepy headstone site in the woods, just to scare me as a Halloween joke. I put my walking gear on, walked out the back door, made my way up through my backyard and up onto the familiar leafy woodsy path, and hurried my way to Susie's tree as quick as I could. I came to a halt as soon as I came to the oak tree. I made 2 full circles all the way around, calling her name even. The jack-o'-lantern still remained on the ground up against the tree base. The bunny mask was gone, though. Day after day, for months, I waited for Susie at that oak tree before I set out for my walks. One winter evening, I finally gave up searching for Susie. So sad, because I never knew what happened to her. My curiosity got the best of me one evening, though. I got out my laptop and searched for information on Susie Osborne and what may have happened to her. And was she the same Susie I had met? There were too many coincidences for it not to be her. After combing through tons of newspaper articles, I unfortunately, finally, found my answer. It turns out that on Halloween Day in 1907, Susie Osborne was out trick-or-treating by herself, against the wishes of her parents. She then told them she was going with her best friend Sarah. This was a lie, of course. Susie wanted to be adventurous and go trick-or-treating all by herself. Apparently, after trick-or-treating was finished in her neighborhood, instead of going home, Susie thought it would be fun to go on an adventure alone in the woods, since it was Halloween after all. She placed her bag of candy up against that big oak tree and headed up the path, blindly, in the dark. Sweet little Susie, in her bunny costume, never made it home that Halloween night. She got lost in those woods. It was freezing cold that night, and her frilly little dress and tights were hardly enough to keep her warm, enough throughout the night. The first thing her parents found was the bag of candy by the oak tree. They searched unsuccessfully for days until they finally found her off the path, through the weeping willow tree, and up the hilly path, and up onto the clearing where the enchanting maple tree thrived. At the base of the tree, they found their daughter Susie's tiny, frozen body, bunny mask still on, and curled up in a fetal position. Susie led me to that spot so that I could know what happened to her, so someone could find her again. She's lost over and over every day in some other dimension, and it breaks my heart. These are now Susie's woods. I still walk this trail daily so that Susie isn't lonely ever again. Even though I've never seen her since, I still speak to her and tell her she's not alone. I always tell her to rest in sweet peace and happy Halloween every day. I hope to see my friend again next Halloween. We're always up for an adventure. Happy Halloween, everyone. And don't forget, have respect for nature, the woods, its beauty, and its history, whether it be dark or light. We all have our scars. Even nature, too. I entered a Halloween attraction. Now I can't ever leave. One day, I was taking a Halloween walk with my hair in the cool October air when I saw a haunted house attraction. The spooky decorations and the antique style caught my eye, so I approached closer. The closer I approached the house, the more details were visible. The antique wood had tears and scratches on it. The skeletons had dried blood on them. Hopefully it was fake. And the gravestones had cracks and rips. It all caught my eye. And the door was effing beautiful. It was old, barren, and antique, with wood peeling from it. My God, the people who made this attraction really know their stuff when it comes to designing. I unconsciously said to myself, in admiration of the antique house that laid before me. Then I entered the house and see that it was pitch black, with water dripping from the faucet, cobwebs everywhere, and more cracks. Soon I progressed, laughing at the cheap scares. The dim lights made me jump slightly, but it wasn't scary, not one bit. Then I came across a room with a girl who looked to be 6 years old, with tattered clothes, scary makeup, and some toys that she was playing with. She then looked at me, the scary makeup revealed in the dull lighting.
"Come play with me,"
she said in a monotone voice. I had to admit I was feeling a little on edge. I felt as if they really knew their stuff and scaring people too. I've got to get the hell out of here, I thought to myself.
Come play with me,
she said, not as a request, but as a command, which put me even more on edge. I normally don't get scared much. Heck, that's why I love horror movies. But this was pure nightmare fuel. But I kept a brave face.
You don't want to leave me alone like Mommy and Daddy, do you?
The girl asked, with tears in her eyes. I felt bad for her, but I didn't want to play with her. Sorry, but I've got to go. Soon, the door slammed shut, making sure that I would stay with the girl. Soon, the girl tugged on my pant leg.
Play with me,
she said, on the verge of tears. I was scared. I really was, but I decided to ignore the fear and play with her. To this day, I still am playing with her. I must play with her. After all, she is a very fun girl to be with. And I am stuck in this house forever and ever. Jack. Do you know of the origin of the jack-o'-lantern? No? Well, let me tell you. It started in a wee village in Ireland with a wee nasty lad named Jack O'Leary, who grew up to be a nasty gentleman. He robbed from the old, he stole from the poor, he harassed the village women, and his crimes even escalated to murder. His deeds could never be proven. There were never witnesses, so he continued to torment the village. No one was safe. Not the old, not the young, nor the sick or the meek. If you had what he wanted, he'd take it with no warning and no remorse. The villagers barricaded themselves in their homes when Jack approached, hoping and praying he'd pass them by. Until one Halloween he went too far. He murdered a child, a wee girl named Gwyneth. Well, that was the last straw. They cornered Jack in a pumpkin patch. They cut a hole in the top of a pumpkin and shoved his head inside and set it on fire. He kicked and he screamed as he died slowly, writhing on the ground. He cursed the town with his last dying breath, vowing to return. So the townspeople carve faces and stick candles inside pumpkins and call them jack-o'-lanterns to make sure Jack doesn't come back seeking revenge. The Shivering Man. Do you know the ode of the Shivering Man? As the dawn of October 31st draws near, the town shudders its homes and trembles in fear. There was a poor beggar not long ago, who the town branded a thief and forced him to go. When he refused, they cut off his hands. They screamed and they cheered and drove him far from their lands. When he returned, he begged for shelter and food. But when the town saw him, it darkened their mood. They chained him in iron, a lesson they teach. To all future beggars, they marooned him alone on the beach. Hungry and cold, he died in the night. But first he swore vengeance for their cruelty and spite. When he returns on each Halloween, he takes only one. You can hear when they scream. So lock all your windows and bolt all your doors. Keep your family inside, because the Shivering Man is looking for more. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.